Dr. Samuel Hayes had prepared for his assignment as cultural advisor to the Zephyrian imperial court by studying diplomatic protocols, learning about warrior traditions, and memorizing the complex hierarchy that governed interactions between species whose concepts of honor and strength had been forged in centuries of interstellar conflict. What he hadn't prepared for was the way Princess Kira Veltane commanded attention while simultaneously seeming to minimize her own presence, as if she were performing a careful balancing act between royal authority and personal invisibility. Dr. Hayes, Princess Kira said during their first formal meeting, her voice carrying the musical undertones characteristic of Zephyrian speech while maintaining the controlled precision that marked her as someone accustomed to having her words analyzed for political implications. I understand you're here to help me navigate the cultural complexities of human diplomatic practices. Your Highness, Hayes replied, noting how Princess Kira positioned herself so that her right profile was visible while her left side remained carefully angled away from his direct view. I'm here to provide whatever cultural insight might be useful for the upcoming negotiations between our governments. Princess Kira's bioluminescent patterns showed the steady blues and purples that indicated formal attention, but Hayes caught subtle fluctuations that suggested underlying anxiety despite her composed exterior. She moved with the controlled grace that Zephyrian nobility learned from childhood, but her movements seemed calculated to maintain specific positioning rather than expressing natural elegance. The human delegation will include representatives from several Earth governments, as well as colonial administrations from 12 different systems, Princess Kira said, activating holographic displays that showed the complex political landscape they would need to navigate. My understanding is that human negotiation styles emphasize individual personality and emotional connection rather than formal protocol and hierarchical respect. That's generally accurate, Hayes confirmed, studying the diplomatic briefings while simultaneously observing Princess Kira's body language for signs of the stress that her formal demeanor was working to conceal. Human diplomats tend to build trust through personal rapport before addressing substantive policy issues. Which requires me to present myself as approachable and personally engaging rather than simply politically authoritative, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns flickering in ways that suggested the concept of personal presentation created anxiety beyond normal diplomatic concerns. Your Highness, approachability doesn't require you to compromise your natural authority, Hayes said gently. It's more about allowing people to see the intelligence and capability that you clearly possess, rather than hiding those qualities behind formal protocol. Princess Kira's patterns shifted to deeper blues that Hayes was learning to recognize as indicating thoughtful consideration mixed with uncertainty. Dr. Hayes, in Zephyrian culture, personal presentation reflects not just individual character but family honor and political legitimacy. Leaders are expected to embody the physical and cultural ideals that their people aspire to achieve. And what ideals does Zephyrian culture expect its leaders to embody? Strength, perfection, uncompromised dignity, and the kind of physical presence that commands respect through visual impact as well as intellectual capability, Princess Kira listed with the precision of someone reciting fundamental cultural doctrine. Hayes noted how Princess Kira's voice carried subtle tension when discussing physical presentation, and how she unconsciously touched the left side of her face before quickly dropping her hand when she realized the gesture might be observed. Your Highness, human diplomatic culture tends to value authenticity over perfection, Hayes said carefully. We're often more impressed by leaders who acknowledge their challenges and demonstrate how they've overcome difficulties than by those who maintain facades of invulnerability. Fascinating, Princess Kira said, though her tone suggested that human appreciation for acknowledged imperfection was a cultural quirk rather than a useful diplomatic insight. Dr. Hayes, what specific recommendations do you have for presenting Zephyrian strength in ways that humans will find personally engaging? I'd recommend focusing on your intellectual capabilities and your genuine commitment to diplomatic progress, Hayes said, recognizing that Princess Kira was seeking tactical advice rather than personal reassurance. Your Highness, your reputation for strategic thinking and cultural sensitivity already provides excellent foundation for building trust with human negotiators. But you believe personal connection will be necessary beyond professional competence? I believe that allowing people to see your authentic personality, your curiosity about other cultures, your thoughtful approach to complex problems, your ability to find common ground despite different perspectives, will make the negotiations more productive for everyone involved. Princess Kira was quiet for several minutes, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that suggested complex internal processing. When she spoke again, her voice carried vulnerability that hadn't been present during their formal discussions. Dr. Hayes, what if authentic personality includes aspects that compromise the image of strength and perfection that diplomatic leadership requires? Hayes felt the conversation shifting toward territory that was more personal than their cultural advisory relationship typically addressed, but Princess Kira's question seemed to carry significance beyond simple diplomatic strategy. Your Highness, in my experience, the strongest leaders are often those who faced significant challenges and found ways to grow stronger through overcoming them, Hayes said. Humans tend to respect resilience more than we respect the absence of difficulties. Even when those difficulties have left visible evidence. Especially then, Hayes said, beginning to understand that Princess Kira's careful positioning and anxiety about personal presentation might stem from specific concerns about physical appearance that went beyond normal diplomatic image management. I see, Princess Kira said, though her bioluminescent pattern suggested that she was processing information that challenged fundamental assumptions about leadership and acceptability. Their session was interrupted by the arrival of Princess Kira's aide, who announced that the Royal Council required her immediate attention for preliminary briefings about the human delegation's expected arrival schedule. As Princess Kira prepared to leave, Hayes noted how she automatically adjusted her positioning to ensure that her left profile remained concealed from his view. Your Highness, Hayes said as she reached the chamber's exit, tomorrow we could discuss specific conversation techniques that might help you connect with individual human negotiators. That would be useful, Princess Kira agreed, pausing at the doorway with her face carefully angled away from his direct sight. Dr. Hayes, thank you for your insights about human appreciation for authenticity over perfection. Thank you for being open to exploring different approaches to diplomatic presentation, Hayes replied, understanding that their conversation had touched on issues that extended far beyond cultural advisory services into territory that was deeply personal for someone whose role required constant public visibility. As Princess Kira departed, Hayes found himself wondering what kind of visible evidence she was concerned about, and whether her diplomatic challenges involved more than simply learning to navigate human cultural preferences. Her careful positioning, her anxiety about personal presentation, and her questions about authenticity versus perfection suggested that she was dealing with personal insecurities that affected her professional confidence in ways that standard diplomatic training couldn't address. Over the following days, Hayes began observing Princess Kira's behavior more carefully, noting how she consistently avoided profile views, how her stress levels seemed to correlate with lighting conditions in various rooms, and how she sometimes touched her face in gestures that suggested self-consciousness about her appearance rather than simple nervous habits. The pattern suggested that Princess Kira was concealing something about her physical appearance that she believed would compromise her political authority if revealed, creating a diplomatic challenge that involved not just cultural education but helping someone find the confidence to present herself authentically despite personal vulnerabilities that her culture might not accept. Hayes realized that his role as cultural advisor was about to expand beyond teaching human customs into helping Princess Kira navigate the intersection of personal insecurity and political necessity, territory that would require sensitivity, patience, and the kind of understanding that went far beyond standard diplomatic protocol. The breakthrough in understanding Princess Kira's concealed anxiety came during their third week of cultural preparation, when Hayes suggested they practice informal conversation techniques by discussing art and aesthetic appreciation, topics that would allow natural personal expression while remaining professionally relevant to diplomatic cultural exchange. Dr. Hayes, Princess Kira said, examining holographic displays of human artistic works that ranged from classical sculptures to contemporary installations, I'm curious about human tolerance for imperfection in artistic representation. What do you mean by tolerance for imperfection? Hayes asked, noting how Princess Kira's bioluminescent patterns showed genuine intellectual curiosity mixed with something that might have been personal investment in his answer. Many of these works deliberately include asymmetrical elements, rough textures, or unconventional proportions, Princess Kira observed, gesturing toward images that included everything from ancient pottery with deliberate irregularities to modern sculptures that celebrated natural rather than idealized forms. In Zephyrian aesthetic theory, such elements would be considered flaws that diminish artistic value. Human aesthetic appreciation often finds beauty in imperfection because it suggests authenticity, individual character, and the kind of natural variation that makes each work unique, Hayes explained, watching Princess Kira's reactions to his words with growing awareness that their discussion carried significance beyond art appreciation. "You're suggesting that imperfection can enhance rather than diminish aesthetic appeal?" "I'm suggesting that what we call imperfection often reflects reality more accurately than idealized perfection does," Hayes said, activating additional displays that showed human portraiture spanning centuries of artistic development. "Perfect symmetry and flawless proportions can be beautiful, but they can also feel artificial or disconnected from genuine human experience." Princess Kira studied the portraits with the focused attention she applied to complex political analyses, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that suggested she was processing concepts that challenged fundamental assumptions about beauty and acceptability. Dr. Hayes, these portraits include subjects with visible scars, asymmetrical features, and what Zephyrian culture would classify as physical defects, she observed, her voice carrying careful neutrality that suggested personal significance in the observation. "And many humans find those portraits more compelling than idealized representations because they capture the complexity and resilience of people who've lived full lives rather than existed in theoretical perfection," Hayes replied, recognizing that Princess Kira was exploring ideas that had direct relevance to her own concerns about appearance and acceptability. "You believe that visible evidence of difficult experiences can enhance rather than compromise someone's appeal to others?" "I believe that how someone has survived and grown from difficult experiences often reveals more about their character than their original appearance ever could," Hayes said, understanding that they were no longer discussing art theory but exploring Princess Kira's fundamental concerns about her own acceptability. Princess Kira was quiet for several minutes, her bioluminescent patterns showing the deep contemplation that characterized her approach to ideas that required significant conceptual adjustment. "Dr. Hayes," she said finally, "may I ask you a hypothetical question about human social responses?" "Of course." "If a human leader bore visible marks from past trauma, scars that indicated survival of serious injury, would that compromise their political authority or enhance their credibility as someone who understands the real costs of conflict?" Hayes felt the conversation reaching the core of Princess Kira's personal concerns as he realized that her careful positioning, her anxiety about presentation, and her questions about authenticity all related to scars that she believed would undermine her political effectiveness if revealed. "Your Highness, in human political culture, leaders who bear visible evidence of sacrifice or survival often command more respect than those whose authority comes from inherited position without personal cost," Hayes said carefully. "We tend to trust people who've demonstrated resilience through actual experience more than those who've simply avoided difficulty. Even when those marks are extensive, disfiguring by conventional standards. Especially then," Hayes said with conviction that seemed to surprise Princess Kira. "Your Highness, humans have elected leaders who were scarred by war, disfigured by accidents, or marked by diseases they survived. We've found that visible evidence of overcoming adversity often translates into political strength rather than weakness." Princess Kira's bioluminescent patterns erupted in brilliant blues and golds that seemed to fill the study chamber with light as she processed the possibility that her concealed scars might represent political assets rather than liabilities in human diplomatic contexts. "That's a remarkably different perspective from Zephyrian cultural standards," she said, her voice carrying wonder mixed with uncertainty about whether such different standards could be personally relevant. "Different cultural contexts create different opportunities for presenting strength and leadership," Hayes agreed. "Your Highness, the upcoming negotiations represent a chance to demonstrate Zephyrian capabilities to people who might appreciate aspects of your experience that your own culture doesn't fully value." Their conversation was interrupted by a system malfunction that caused the study chamber's lighting to flicker and shift, temporarily illuminating areas that were usually kept in shadow. For just a moment, the left side of Princess Kira's face was clearly visible, revealing extensive scarring that created intricate patterns across her cheek and temple, marks that spoke of serious trauma survived rather than simple injury endured. Princess Kira's reaction was immediate and automatic. She turned away sharply, her hand moving to shield the scarred area while her bioluminescent patterns shifted to the deep reds that indicated distress and the desire to hide. "Please don't look," she said quietly, her voice carrying the vulnerability of someone whose deepest fear had just been exposed despite years of careful concealment. Hayes's response was to continue their conversation without acknowledgement of what he'd seen, maintaining the same tone and interest level that had characterized their discussion before the lighting malfunction revealed what she'd been concealing. "As I was saying, different audiences provide opportunities to reframe perceived weaknesses as demonstrated strengths," he said calmly, giving Princess Kira time to compose herself while making it clear that his respect for her hadn't changed based on seeing her scars. Princess Kira slowly turned back toward him, her bioluminescent patterns showing amazement mixed with cautious relief as she realized that his reaction, or lack of reaction, was genuine rather than polite pretense. "You saw," she said simply. "I saw someone who survived something that could have killed them," Hayes replied honestly. "Your Highness, those scars tell a story of resilience that any human diplomat would respect." "You're not repulsed? Disturbed by the disfigurement?" "I'm impressed by your survival and curious about the experience that created those marks," Hayes said, recognizing that Princess Kira was testing whether his earlier words about human appreciation for resilience would hold true when applied to her specific situation. "Dr. Hayes, those scars are why I cannot present myself authentically in diplomatic contexts," Princess Kira said, her voice carrying the weight of years spent believing that her appearance disqualified her from effective leadership. "Zephyrian cultural standards require physical perfection from political representatives. These marks, they represent failure, weakness, inability to protect oneself adequately. Or they represent survival, determination, and the kind of personal courage that qualifies someone to make decisions about other people's safety," Hayes suggested gently. "Your Highness, the interpretation depends entirely on the cultural context and the observer's values." Princess Kira studied his face with the intense evaluation that she applied to critical political assessments, searching for any sign that his acceptance was diplomatic courtesy rather than genuine response. "You truly believe that humans might see these scars as evidence of strength rather than proof of inadequacy?" "I believe that the right humans, the kind of people worth building diplomatic relationships with, would see those scars as evidence that you understand the real costs of conflict and the value of survival," Hayes said with conviction that seemed to resonate with Princess Kira's need for authentic assessment rather than reassuring platitudes. For the first time since Hayes had arrived at the Zephyrian court, Princess Kira allowed him to see her face fully, scars and all, without attempting to conceal or minimize what she'd been hiding. Her bioluminescent patterns showed colors he'd never seen before. Hope mixed with terror, relief combined with vulnerability, and the beginning of something that might have been trust in the possibility that authenticity could coexist with political effectiveness. "Dr. Hayes," she said quietly, "would you be willing to help me explore how to present these scars as assets rather than liabilities in the upcoming negotiations? I would be honored to help you develop strategies for presenting your full self, scars included, as the formidable leader you clearly are," Hayes replied, understanding that their work together had evolved beyond cultural advisory services into something more personal and potentially more transformative for both of them. The full revelation of Princess Kira's story came during their preparation for the most challenging aspect of the upcoming negotiations, a formal presentation where she would need to articulate Zephyrian positions on interspecies cooperation while maintaining the personal authority that would make human negotiators take her seriously as a political leader. "Dr. Hayes," Princess Kira said, positioning herself so that the chamber's lighting illuminated her scars clearly rather than concealing them, "there's something you need to understand about these marks before you can help me present them as political assets." "I'm listening," Hayes said, noting how Princess Kira's decision to reveal her scars fully represented a fundamental shift in her approach to trust and vulnerability. 5 years ago, I was part of a diplomatic mission to establish trade relationships with human colonial governments in the Outer Rim, Princess Kira began, her bioluminescent patterns showing the steady blues that indicated painful memory being shared with deliberate control. "I was young, idealistic, and convinced that Zephyrian human cooperation could benefit both our species. What happened? Extremist factions within our own government opposed the negotiations," Princess Kira continued, her voice carrying the precision that characterized her approach to difficult topics. They believed that diplomatic cooperation with humans would weaken Zephyrian cultural identity and military superiority. Hayes felt his understanding of the political context shift as he realized that Princess Kira's scars resulted from internal political violence rather than external conflict. The extremists arranged for what appeared to be a human terrorist attack on our diplomatic quarters, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns darkening as she described events that had clearly shaped her understanding of political trust and personal vulnerability. Chemical weapons designed to look like human military technology, but actually deployed by Zephyrian operatives who wanted to destroy any possibility of peaceful cooperation. You were deliberately targeted by your own people. I was targeted because my advocacy for human-Zephyrian partnership made me a threat to their ideology, Princess Kira confirmed. The chemical attack was intended to kill me and blame human extremists, creating the kind of incident that would justify terminating all diplomatic relations. Hayes absorbed the implications of what she was telling him. That Princess Kira's scars represented not just survival of trauma but survival of betrayal by people who should have protected her, and that her commitment to diplomatic cooperation had continued despite personal cost that most people would find prohibitive. Princess, you survived an assassination attempt and continued pursuing the diplomatic goals that nearly got you killed. I survived because Zephyrian royal medical technology could repair the damage enough to preserve my life, but not enough to restore my appearance to acceptable standards, Princess Kira explained. The scars became permanent reminders of the political risks involved in challenging traditional approaches to interspecies relations. And your response was to continue advocating for cooperation despite those risks? My response was to recognize that the people who tried to kill me were terrified of the possibility that humans and Zephyrians might find common ground, Princess Kira said, her voice carrying the conviction that had sustained her through years of concealing trauma while pursuing the goals that had made her a target. Their willingness to commit murder to prevent diplomatic progress convinced me that such progress must be valuable enough to justify continued effort. Hayes found himself looking at Princess Kira with new understanding of the courage required to maintain her public role while carrying both physical and emotional scars from political violence that had come from within her own government. Your Highness, when you speak about the scars representing failure or weakness, you're describing how Zephyrian culture interprets them rather than what they actually represent. What do you believe they actually represent? They represent someone who was willing to risk everything for diplomatic progress, who survived assassination attempts designed to prevent cooperation between species, and who has continued working toward the goals that nearly cost her life, Hayes said with conviction that seemed to surprise Princess Kira. Princess, those scars are evidence of exactly the kind of moral courage that humans most respect in political leaders. Princess Kira's bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that indicated complex emotional processing as she considered the possibility that her concealed shame might actually be revealed strength when presented in appropriate contexts. Dr. Hayes, even if humans might interpret my scars differently than Zephyrians do, I still cannot appear in public without concealment, she said. The upcoming negotiations will include Zephyrian observers whose political support I need for implementing any agreements we reach. Revealing my disfigurement would compromise my authority with my own people. Unless revealing your scars serves a strategic purpose that enhances rather than compromises your political position, Hayes suggested. Princess, what if your scars become part of your argument for why diplomatic cooperation is essential? I don't understand. You bear visible evidence of what happens when extremists are allowed to prevent peaceful cooperation between species, Hayes explained, recognizing the potential for transforming Princess Kira's concealed vulnerability into demonstrated authority. Your scars prove that the costs of failed diplomacy are personal as well as political. Princess Kira was quiet for a long time, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through colors that suggested she was reconceptualizing fundamental assumptions about her own political presentation. You're suggesting that I use my scars as evidence of the stakes involved in successful negotiations? I'm suggesting that your scars tell a story about dedication to diplomatic progress that survived assassination attempts, a story that would resonate powerfully with anyone who understands the real costs of interspecies conflict, Hayes said. But Dr. Hayes, revealing my scars means accepting that I will never meet Zephyrian standards for physical perfection in political leaders. It also means demonstrating that you have standards for moral courage that transcend physical appearance, Hayes replied. Princess, which standard would you rather be judged by? Princess Kira stood and moved to the chamber's large window, where natural lighting illuminated her scars with the kind of clarity that revealed their full extent. Instead of turning away or positioning herself to minimize their visibility, she faced Hayes directly with an expression that showed both determination and terror. Dar. Hayes, if I choose to reveal these scars during the negotiations, I need to know that someone will still see me as a person rather than just as a political symbol or a victim of violence. Hayes recognized that Princess Kira was asking for personal reassurance rather than professional guidance, and that her ability to present herself authentically in diplomatic contexts depended partly on having at least one person whose acceptance wasn't contingent on her maintaining facades of perfection. Princess, he said, standing to face her at the window where her scars were clearly visible, I see someone whose courage exceeds anything I've encountered in years of diplomatic work. I see someone whose commitment to peace survived assassination attempts designed to destroy that commitment. And I see someone whose scars tell a story of survival that makes her more qualified to lead diplomatic negotiations than anyone who's never faced the real costs of failure. You see all of that when you look at these marks. I see all of that when I look at you, Hayes said simply, closing the distance between them until he was standing close enough that his presence provided comfort rather than maintaining professional distance. Princess Kira's bioluminescent patterns erupted in brilliant displays of relief, gratitude, and something that might have been the beginning of trust in the possibility that authenticity could coexist with political effectiveness and personal acceptance. Dr. Hayes, she said quietly, would you stay with me while I practice presenting my scars as evidence of commitment rather than proof of failure? I'll stay with you for as long as you need support in becoming the leader you already are, Hayes replied, understanding that their professional relationship had evolved into something more personal that would require ongoing courage from both of them. As they began developing strategies for Princess Kira to present her authentic self, scars and all, in diplomatic contexts, both understood that their work together had become about more than cultural advisory services. It had become about helping someone find the confidence to transform concealed shame into demonstrated strength, while building the kind of trust that allowed vulnerability to coexist with authority in ways that would serve both personal healing and political progress. The moment of truth came during the formal opening ceremony of the Human-Zephyrian Diplomatic Summit, when Princess Kira faced the choice between appearing with the concealment techniques she'd perfected over 5 years or presenting herself authentically to an audience that included not just human negotiators but Zephyrian political observers whose support she needed for implementing any agreements they might reach. Dr. Hayes, Princess Kira said as they prepared in the private chamber adjacent to the main conference hall, I need you to promise me something before I walk into that room. What do you need? Hayes asked, noting that Princess Kira had chosen to wear formal robes that revealed rather than concealed her scars, and that her bioluminescent patterns showed determination mixed with the kind of terror that accompanied irrevocable decisions. If this goes badly, if revealing my scars compromises the negotiations or destroys my political credibility, I need you to promise that you'll remember who I was trying to be rather than focusing on what I failed to achieve. Hayes moved closer to Princess Kira, close enough that his presence provided the comfort and support that had become essential to her confidence during their weeks of preparation. Princess, you're not going to fail. You're going to show everyone in that room what authentic leadership looks like. How can you be so certain? Because I've watched you practice presenting your scars as evidence of commitment rather than proof of failure, and every time you tell your story honestly, you become more compelling rather than less, Hayes said, his voice carrying conviction that seemed to steady Princess Kira's resolve. Because your scars represent exactly the kind of moral courage that makes people trust leaders with important decisions. Princess Kira turned to face the mirror that would give her a final opportunity to conceal her scars before entering the conference hall, then deliberately positioned herself so that the lighting illuminated every mark clearly. 5 years of hiding, she said quietly. 5 years of believing that these scars made me unqualified to represent my people effectively. And now? Hayes asked. Now I'm going to find out whether survival of assassination attempts makes me more qualified to negotiate peace agreements than people who've never faced the costs of diplomatic failure, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns shifting to the brilliant golds that indicated courage overcoming fear. Princess, whatever happens in that room, you're already the most qualified person to lead these negotiations, Hayes said. Your scars prove that you understand the stakes involved better than anyone else present. As they prepared to enter the conference hall, Princess Kira paused at the threshold and looked back at Hayes with an expression that carried both gratitude and something deeper. Dr. Hayes, when I first asked you not to look at me, you sat closer instead, she said. That moment changed everything about how I understood the possibility of being seen completely and still being accepted. You changed everything about how I understood the relationship between survival and strength, Hayes replied. Princess, watching you find the courage to present yourself authentically has been the most inspiring experience of my diplomatic career. Princess Kira's entrance into the conference hall created the kind of moment that would be remembered in diplomatic histories for generations. As she took her position at the speaker's podium with her scars clearly visible under the formal lighting, the assembled delegates, human and Zephyrian alike, recognized that they were witnessing something unprecedented in interspecies diplomacy. Honored delegates, Princess Kira began, her voice carrying the musical authority that characterized Zephyrian formal speech while maintaining the personal authenticity that Hayes had helped her develop. I appear before you bearing visible evidence of the costs that extremism imposes on those who pursue peaceful cooperation between species. She gestured toward her scars with the same confidence she would use to indicate relevant data displays or important documents. These marks result from a chemical attack 5 years ago, when opponents of human Zephyrian diplomatic cooperation attempted to eliminate me and blame human terrorists for my death. The response from the audience was immediate and profound. Human delegates leaned forward with the kind of attention that indicated recognition of moral authority, while Zephyrian observers showed bioluminescent patterns that suggested they were reassessing fundamental assumptions about the relationship between physical perfection and political legitimacy. I survived that attack and chose to continue pursuing the diplomatic goals that nearly cost my life, Princess Kira continued, because the willingness of extremists to commit murder to prevent cooperation between our species convinced me that such cooperation must be valuable enough to justify continued risk. Hayes watched from the diplomatic observers section as Princess Kira's presentation transformed what could have been perceived weakness into demonstrated strength, using her scars as visual evidence of the stakes involved in successful negotiations rather than attempting to minimize their significance. These scars remind me daily that the alternative to successful diplomacy is not simply political disagreement, but violence that leaves permanent marks on everyone it touches, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns showing the steady confidence that came from speaking truth rather than maintaining facades. They remind me that the leaders who make decisions about war and peace should understand personally what those decisions cost. The audience response was extraordinary. Human delegates began expressing approval through the subtle gestures that indicated respect for authentic leadership, while several Zephyrian observers showed bioluminescent patterns that Hayes had learned indicated profound reconsideration of previously held beliefs. I appear before you not despite these scars, but because of what they represent, Princess Kira concluded. They are evidence that I have already paid a personal price for the diplomatic progress we seek, and that I am prepared to continue paying whatever price peaceful cooperation requires. The standing ovation that followed her presentation included both human and Zephyrian delegates, an unprecedented show of cross-species respect that established Princess Kira's moral authority in ways that perfect physical appearance never could have achieved. As the formal negotiations began, Hayes observed how Princess Kira's decision to reveal her scars had transformed the entire dynamic of the diplomatic process. Human negotiators treated her with the kind of respect reserved for leaders who had proven their commitment through personal sacrifice, while Zephyrian observers began reconsidering their cultural assumptions about the relationship between physical perfection and political legitimacy. Dar. Hayes, Princess Kira said during a break between negotiation sessions, I want to thank you for helping me understand that authenticity could be a source of strength rather than a source of shame. Thank you for teaching me that the most powerful leadership comes from people who have survived challenges that would destroy others and chosen to use that survival to protect people who haven't faced such tests, Hayes replied. Their relationship continued to evolve throughout the summit, as Princess Kira's newfound confidence in presenting herself authentically created space for the kind of personal connection that Hayes had initially been hired to facilitate between diplomatic cultures but which had become something far more meaningful between two individuals who had learned to see each other completely. Princess, Hayes said during one of their private strategy sessions, may I ask you something personal? You may ask me anything, Princess Kira replied, her scars clearly visible in the chamber's lighting as she no longer made any attempt to conceal them. When you told me not to look at you, what were you most afraid I would see? I was afraid you would see proof that I was damaged, unworthy, incapable of representing my people effectively, Princess Kira said honestly. I was afraid you would see someone who had failed to protect herself and therefore couldn't be trusted to protect others. And what do you think I actually saw? Someone who had survived something that should have destroyed her and chosen to use that survival to make diplomatic progress possible for others, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns showing the warm golds that indicated deep contentment. Someone whose scars told a story of courage rather than failure. That's exactly what I saw, Hayes confirmed. Princess, your scars don't diminish your beauty or your authority. They enhance both by proving that your strength is based on real experience rather than theoretical perfection. 6 months after the successful conclusion of the Humans-Ephirian Diplomatic Summit, Hayes found himself permanently assigned to Princess Kira's diplomatic staff, serving not just as cultural advisor but as trusted counselor and companion whose acceptance had helped her transform personal vulnerability into political strength. Any regrets about revealing your scars to the galaxy? Hayes asked as they reviewed preparations for the next phase of interspecies cooperation initiatives. Only the regret that I spent 5 years hiding when I could have been using my experience to help other people find the courage to present themselves authentically, Princess Kira replied, her scars clearly visible in the palace lighting as she worked with the confidence that came from knowing that acceptance was possible even when perfection wasn't. And personally? Hayes asked, understanding that their relationship had evolved beyond professional collaboration into something that combined mutual respect with deep affection. Personally, I've learned that the most meaningful relationships are built with people who choose to sit closer when you ask them not to look, Princess Kira said, her bioluminescent patterns showing the brilliant displays that indicated joy and trust. People who see beauty in survival rather than finding flaws in scars. I've learned that the most beautiful people are often those who bear visible evidence of challenges they've overcome, Hayes replied, understanding that Princess Kira's scars had become not obstacles to overcome but integral parts of the strength and authenticity that made her remarkable as both a leader and a person. Together, they had proven that the most powerful transformations occurred when people found the courage to present themselves authentically rather than maintaining facades of perfection, and that the strongest relationships were built between those who chose to see and accept each other completely, scars and all.